material.
It is on slide now. Now you're on.
Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Canis Erunke. I'm an associate professor of political science. We are looking at Introduction to Public Administration, Poll 217. I'll be doing this together with my very senior colleague, the person of Professor Abdullahi Yama. What we set out to do essentially is to look at the basic concepts of what constitute administration. We look at public administration and look at the importance of public administration. We're also going to be looking at the critical theories of public administration. And then we'll look at some scholarly contributions as far as public administration is concerned. You know, a number of people have looked at administration from a very loose point of view. Most people look at administration as merely rolling a stone. We have a group of persons, one or two, coming together to roll a stone. That is administration. The argument that most scholars have put forward is that this definition is more or less simplistic and does not address the core of the subject. And so when we talk about administration, Ikelebe, for example, 1984 has alluded that administration is simply what government wants to do and what government does not want to do. So it's a two-way traffic. Government can decide to do something concerning a policy object and may decide not to do anything concerning a specific policy. So that is administration. In either of the two extremes, you find that yes, government wants to implement a policy, that is administration. And if they still don't want to implement a policy, it's still our administration. So, but emerging scholars that have come to talk about this concept have argued variously that administration is not just about rolling a stone or getting people to push a particular log of wood from one position to another position. That does not speak well of what we want to do. And so progress has been made, and consistently too, to the area of what is public. When you talk about public, that is what attracts the attention of most scholars. Can talk about Prestus, can talk about Balogun, 1956, can talk about a number of other scholars that have tried to speak on the concept of public administration. So, broadly speaking, when we talk about public administration, we are talking about government. So, public here is synonymous with government. Can talk about government, the grassroots, government at the state level, government at the federal level, or the federal government. For example, what we have in Nigeria. So administration is a whole gamut of what happens from the center down to the grassroots. Remember, we have about, in fact, exactly 774 local governments. We have 36 states and the FCT as an adjunct state. Though most critics have, agitations have been going on by critics that FCT should be looked at as a state. But that's a discussion for another day. And so we also have the central government. All of these work together to form the basis for administration, political administration, economic administration, and so on. But what is of interest for us to note in this class is the extent to which government can go to be able to justify what it calls the basic responsibility, administrative responsibility of government. And you should also understand that the duty of government, as provided by extant rule, or if you like, the 1999 Constitution as amended, is public provisioning. What that means is that it is the duty of government to provide for the people, the general interest of the people. And so you see people talking about, the common good, the good of all, not just some few select cartels, political cartels. We're talking about the common good of all, where government provides good road network, telecommunication facilities, and other critical infrastructures for the common good of over 200 million people and still counting. And so, having looked at this, we will now proceed further to look at the background of administration in Nigeria. Recall that we had said earlier that administration is public and public is administration. And our interest is to look at the perspective of public administration against the backdrop of the various pre-colonial Nigerian society that had existed long before now. A lot of people look at Nigeria as a heterogeneous society, and so well too that you have a lot of centrifugal forces interwoven together. You also know that from the background of the formation of the Nigerian state, right from the period of amalgamation, colonization, amalgamation, and so on, and all these preceding events that led to the eventual realization of the nation's independence in 1960 from colonial rule, Nigeria had its own fair share of local administration. And so you talk essentially on the compartmentalization of the Hausa, Fulani, the Igbos, the Yorubas, and so on, and some of the social formations you had within this sect. For example, if you are talking about the Hausa, Fulani, most scholars have also agreed that the social system in this regard was characterized more or less by a centralized form of government, an administrative pattern, where we had the emir as a political head. The emir too was more like religious head and all of that. And you see a power flow emanating from the emir down to the hakimis, down to the galadimas, up to some certain sections of society and some traditional elite groups, the certain powers and all of that, to the last man standing. And for you to be able to understand clearly what we are talking about here, you will see this arrangement from the point of view of the hierarchy of transmission of political power. I told you that the emir as a head was not alone. He had some subordinates that were working with him and working for him. The hakimis, who acted like the go-between between the emir and the people. And in that feudal arrangement, the locals cultivated their crops, harvested the same, and surrendered to the emir, paid local taxes, the Jangali taxes, bicycle taxes, land taxes, and all of that. And the same thing was transmitted to the privy council in London, headed by the Queen of England. And so, the same can be said of the Yoruba centralized pre-colonial traditional administrative system, where you had the Oba as a spiritual head, the religious head. The Oba also doubled as the major pilot of the affairs, social affairs of the kingdom. You talk about the Oyo kingdom, you talk about the Egbas and the rest of them. Most people also talk about the Ovaremi Nogbesi and some of these renowned and notable traditional administrators. So, just like the Hausa Fulani, you also had the Oba who had other subordinates under him. Talk about the Yomesis, talk about the Are or Nakankanfo, you talk about the Bales, those of them that claim to be communicating between deities and stuff like that. So, you should also note that in the Igbo administrative system, it was not like the Hausa Fulani and the Yorubas. What most critics have put up in terms of argument, scholarly argument, is that in the Igbo traditional society, it was more or less a disorganized system where people had very little regard to administrative procedures and processes. You recall the issue of the warrant chief being unruly, or more or less like people that were not coordinated, people that rather made life difficult for the locals, and that gave rise to what is called the Aba Women Riot, where the women went to the street and demonstrated against not just the colonial government, not just the warrant chiefs, but also the colonial government and the colonial administration, and also the role played by some of these youths christened the age grade system. People between certain age limits form themselves into age grade system, and the kind of roles they played, very powerful role they played in that society, by cutting off and usurping the traditional roles of title holders like the Ezes, the warrant chiefs, and the Ozo title holders, and going ahead to do what they like. You also recall that in that society, certain things happened to a level where the Council of Elders had little or no opportunities to exert responsibilities, administrative responsibilities. And this led to a number of unruly behaviors by these youths, who could also declare someone persona non grata. If they do that, maybe you have committed an abomination or giving birth to an abnormal child with a very tiny leg or big head or something. They can just take you to the evil forest to go and die in that forest, and die slowly. You die a gradual death, in what literary experts refer to as death by installment. They like, they give you food, they don't like, they give you food. So all of this should be able to interest us, for us to yearn for that in our scholarly curiosity, to be able to know what really transpired. But what we should know is that whether we want to agree or not, some form of administration took place. And so that is by the way. You also should understand that in the core subject of this discourse, there are procedures. Procedures known as POSCOP. If you want to engage in administrative procedures, what do you need to do? You bring in your acronym known as POSCOP, POSDCORB. And the full meaning means, the first P means planning. Planning means that there must be some element of planning for organization to succeed. Because the interest of organization essentially is to succeed, have a desired end. Then you have organizing. To organize means to mobilize your workers or the workforce to achieve set goals. Maybe in a university system like this, you have the vice chancellor as the helmsman at the top. You have the principal officers, you can talk about the registrar, you can talk about the bursar, you can talk about other important personalities, members of council, the deanage and faculties and department. All of these gives you a fair idea of the organogram of an administrative structure within a university system. And so, what does a university do? For example, you have to organize, mobilize people, just like what I'm doing here. It is my duty to teach you and impute or impart the required knowledge for you to learn and make meaning out of yourself and your families and the entire nation at the end of this study. So you also need staffing. Staffing here requires building personnel that will man this organization. Like I said again, organization does not exist in a vacuum. People must be there. Personnel must be there to man the organization. You also have issues bordering on directing. You issue out orders and expecting compliance by subordinates. Compliance very necessary. Disobedience is an anomaly. So you also have coordinating. You have to mobilize the right kind of staff for effective organizational vitality. You also report. This involves feedback to managers in organization. And then very lastly, you have budgeting. You know, budgeting involves finance. You can practically do nothing without money. So budgeting involves financial disbursement and all of that. That leads us to the significance of our organization. So if I ask you, for example, what is the whole essence of setting up an administration? What you can say, therefore, is that an organization is there to enhance the realization of set objective. That's point number one. Number two, organization is also significant because it can attract and enhance teamwork. Organization also facilitates cooperation. It brings about orderliness. It encourages efficiency and all of that. So having looked at that, it is also our place to look at the scope. To what extent can we say public administration cover? For example, within the Nigerian state, you have issues revolving on protectionism. That is one aspect, one important aspect of administration in Nigeria. We are talking about Nigeria essentially. So when you talk about protectionism, you also talk about promotional activities. You also mention proprietary activities, and you also mention regulatory activities. Let me explain them in turn. If you talk about protectionism, your mind will go back to protection of lives and property. Isn't it so? You talk about protection of lives and property. And government uses the instrumentality of the armed forces, for example, to quell riot. If you see an uprising, if you see people trying to, break the rules, people trying to steal, people trying to cause mayhem and cause bloodshed and local community fracas and all of that, the institution of the Nigerian Army, for example, can be drafted. Even though we do know that constitutionally speaking, the Nigerian Army has the sole responsibility of protecting the nation from external aggression. You know, these days we're talking about coup d'etat, the 6 African countries engulfed in coup d'etat. So when you see the current incumbent president talking about drafting the Nigerian Army to go to Niger, you can understand the enormity of what it takes to deal with external aggression. So that is a story for another day. So you have also the police, the customs, the civil defense, and so on. That is that for protectionism. For promotional activities, you talk about farmers groups, cooperative groups, businessmen, businesswomen, the aged. In most civilized climes, we have the aged forming their union. It's only in Nigeria that we take some of these things for granted. We also have proprietary activities under the scope of public administration. This includes government-owned enterprises like water board, like post offices, except for a few of them that have been privatized. But you should also understand that government has some few percent equity shares in some of these public utilities. And so what that means is that government has a minimal control system so that you don't allow these people to do what they like. You also have vehicle assembly plants. We used to have Peugeot in Nigeria. That one has gone moribund, far away Kaduna State there. We also have where they manufacture small arms and light weapons. We have textile industries, the petrochemical industries, and all of that. All this constitute the scope. And then very lastly, the regulatory. Government is involved in regulatory activities. Your mind should go to agencies and parastatals under the Federal Ministry of Health, for example, like NAFDAC. You talk about others in Federal Ministry of Works, others in Ministry of Commerce, and all of that. So, very important examples like Standard Organization of Nigeria, Nigerian Drug Law Enforcement Agency, among others. All of these are actively involved in regulatory activities. And so we also look at the difference between public-private. Public-private. Private is private, meaning that private is capitalist oriented. When you talk about capitalism, your mind goes to a situation where people produce for the sake of profit motive. What the Constitution has said is that government should not come and do anything to begin to ask citizens to pay heavily for profit motive. Except now that we are talking about neoliberalism and agencies, international agencies like the World Bank and the IMF are foisting neoliberal policies on Nigeria and Africa and less developed economies of the world. Otherwise, the general duty of government is to provide for everyone without asking you to pay. You know, you also look at the similarities and all of that. And then most importantly, the basic features of public administration. They include neutrality, political neutrality. That means you must remain neutral. If I call civil servant, we're talking about called civil bureaucracy here. Bureaucracy means those hierarchical structures in a civil administration, in a civil or public administration. So if you're a civil servant, for example, one of the features of administration is that you must remain politically neutral. You don't have to show yourself and say, well, I support Buhari, I support Tinubu, I support Atiku. If you want to support Buhari or Tinubu or Atiku, you first of all resign your appointment and then go into full-time politics and support whoever you want to support. So you also have specialization. Most people look at this one as an aspect of administration where you have specialty for a particular administrative bias, and then personality, and then continuity. It means government must continue. Meritocracy, you put the right people in the right place. You don't deal with mediocres or people that can hardly deliver. Anonymity must not be seen, must not be heard. Impartiality, accountability, and so on and so forth. This also leads us gradually to the control. In Nigeria, we have administrative control. How do you control administration? First, you have the executive control, the judicial control. Executive control, I talk about the head of state. He can decide not to append his signature on any bill. That's executive control. Judicial control, you are talking about those within the jurisprudence and those within the Nigerian legal system that can look at a situation and say, well, this one cannot hold water, so we declare it null and void or extra vires and unconstitutional, and all the legal terminologies and jargon that you can think of. You also have internal control mechanism. You also have the clientele. Clientele here means that in administration, the same people that are eating and drinking with government are the same people that can come up and begin to criticize government. They can criticize government. That's a clientele control. And so, this also leads us gradually to what theory means. This aspect of the lecture is very, very important for students to be able to understand. You know, and first of all, the question you ask yourself is, what is a theory? A theory refers to any form of idea you can use to explain facts or phenomena. Facts or phenomena. Facts are things that you can prove or not be able to prove or disprove. So you also ask yourself, is a theory necessary at all? The answer is yes, a resounding yes. Theory is very necessary. First, it can explain social problems in society. It helps you improve the world around us. Theory gives scientific outlook to intellectual activities and so on and so forth. For want of time, we may not go into full details. And then this also leads us to types of theories. The first that comes into mind is a scientific management theory. Scientific management theory. You also talk about administrative management theory or the bureaucratic advocate. If you talk about scientific management theory, your mind goes to Frederick Taylor, administrative management school of thought. You talk about Max Weber, and then the bureaucratic advocate. So, for want of time again, we may not go into details. But I also want to look at this theory, the aspect of theory from the backdrop of those from the classical school of thought. I want you to go home, do your own independent research on James Watt and their contributions. Remember when they took over their father's foundry in London way back in 1796. People like Robert Owen, people like Taylor himself. We talk about scientific management theory, administrative theory, Max Weber again, and then basically Henry Fayol tried to look at his 14-point principle: division of work, authority, discipline, subordination, remuneration, and all of that. And then lastly, esprit de corps. And then also you look at human relations. You also look at behavioral theory, where mention will be made of Mary Parker Follett, Abraham Maslow in his theory of needs, and so on and so forth. So, these theories are inexhaustible. But for want of time, and to allow some other people to come on board, I want to pause here briefly, but don't forget that mention must be made of systems theory, contingency theory, and all that these theories portend. And the beauty of it all is that it adds up to what administration should look like. It's not just enough to talk about theory. You talk about theory in order to be able to build an organization and make it viable, to make the system a better place to stay. I want to thank you very much. I encourage you to read at home, do your independent assessment at home, and have a great day. Thank you.
I did not touch anything.
No.
Okay, let me see.
You see what that?
Because that was why I told you to scroll like this.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
You were, and this one you were like.
I was clicking from here. The thing was not scrolling. I was clicking from here. Check, let's see.